All right. Well, we're going to get started and welcome everyone to our next Red Hill Rediscovered program, Archaeology of the Servant's House. My name is Cody Youngblood, and I'm the Director of Historic Preservation and Collections here at Patrick Henry's Red Hill. And I'm so glad you all could join us today. And I'm here with our staff archaeologist, Lucia Butler. Lucia is a graduate of the College of William and Mary's anthropology program, and she's been on staff here at Red Hill since 2021. She's been doing a lot of great work getting our archaeology program in-house off the ground. And she's going to be talking today about a servant's house, which she's been doing a lot of research into since first coming here. So as people come on, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and leave any questions you might have in the chat, and we will answer those at the end. If you love what we're doing here at Red Hill, please visit us every month online for our next Red Hill Rediscovered programs. We have also some in-person programs happening. Certainly, we hope everyone will join us in person on July 4th. And in case you want to see all the great things we're doing at Red Hill, you can visit us online at redhill.org/events. So with that, I will bring it over to Lucia, and we will get started. Off to you, Lucia.
All right, thanks Cody so much for that introduction. And hi everyone, thank you for tuning in to today's Red Hill Rediscovered lecture. My name is Lucia, I'm the staff archaeologist at Red Hill, and I'm excited to share with you about our archaeology program and what we've been up to. If you have visited the grounds either last summer or within the last month, you might have seen me and some of our volunteers digging out on the lawn, or you might have missed us. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to chat with you all about our new archaeology program, and particularly the work we did last year at the site of a servant's house. And if you're ever visiting Red Hill and you see us digging out there, you're always welcome to come ask what we're doing. We love to talk about it. So this presentation is titled Archaeology of a Servant's House. And I'm certainly going to share with you a lot about that excavation, but there are some other things I want to chat with you about as well. So, let me go over here. So I'll start out with a, let's see. All right, so I'm going to start out with a discussion of our archaeology program, and then I'm going to get into the investigation of the Servant's House site last year. Then I'll shift into talking about the lab portion of our work. I'll show you some of the artifacts from the Servant's House site, and I'll take you on a mini tour of our archaeology lab since most visitors don't get to see that. And finally, I'll tell you a little bit about this year's investigation, which is at the original site of Patrick Henry's law office. Like Cody said, at the end, we'll have some time for me to answer your questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask in the comments. All right, so the official name of our archaeology program is HMS Red Hill, with the HMS acronym standing for Heritage Management Service. HMS Red Hill has been around for a little over a year now, and it is Red Hill's first in-house archaeology program. There has been significant archaeology done here in the past by contracted archaeologists and institutions, but in 2023, HMS Red Hill was started as an ongoing program to identify, manage, and protect the cultural resources of this historic property, and also to involve the public in this work. So this program was formed in consultation with Dr. Brian Bates of the Longwood Institute of Archaeology and with Craig Rose of Dominion Research Group. Both of them have done work on Red Hill sites before, and they continue to contribute their archaeological expertise to our program. So we are really very fortunate to be able to work with them. So the first area that HMS Red Hill chose to investigate was the site of a building labeled as a servant's house on a 1936 National Park Service survey of Red Hill. This house is no longer standing, but if you've been to Red Hill, its location is about 100 or so feet northwest of the Henry House. You would see it to the right of the boxwood rows right here as you are walking on the path from the visitor center down towards the Henry House. And as we can see in this map, back in 1936, the servants' house stood immediately north of an ice house, and it had a garden and a small shed on its northern side. On its western side, there was a hill that sloped down towards a road, as it still does today. So why did we choose the servants' house site? The mission of HMS Red Hill is to help us understand the historical landscape through time, which includes Patrick Henry's era, but extends beyond that as well. In the case of the servants' house, we had the opportunity to learn more about Red Hill in the early 20th century, which was when Henry's great-granddaughter, Lucy Harrison, owned Red Hill and lived on the property. So what did Red Hill look like during this time? Well, by 1912, Lucy had expanded the Henry house into a 25-room mansion. The law office was relocated and added onto, and sharecroppers were working Red Hill's agricultural areas. There were several families and individuals who worked at Red Hill during this period, both as farm laborers and as domestic servants, and some of them rented houses on the property, like the servants' house. So our goal in this first investigation was to learn more about the servants' house and the people who lived there. So we were looking for any building remains or artifacts that could tell us more about that. This photo on the right-hand side is not the servants' house, but rather an old kitchen, which we will talk about later. So going back to the National Park Service survey, this was one of our most important resources as we were identifying and locating the site. It is the earliest known description of this building, and it offers quite a few details about the servants' house. For example, it shows us that at the time the house stood on a rock foundation. It had weatherboard siding, there was a shingle roof over the center portion, and composition roofing over either of the extensions. It was likely constructed sometime in the early 20th century, since we have documents that refer to a servant's house that Lucy Harrison and her sister Elizabeth Lyons had built for a maid and her husband. There are also some corresponding photographs taken at the time of the 1936 survey that give us various angles of the building. So in this photo, we are looking northeast up towards the back of the house from the road. We can see the center portion right here with those two extensions on the sides, and of course the weatherboard siding. And in a second photo, we get a glimpse of the front of the house, and really just a glimpse. This is the front of it right here. The caption in this photo reads that the view looks down upon the old kitchen remains to the northwest of the tree. And this photo was indeed taken from the top of a tree, since they did not have drones back in 1936. So, and it mentions an old kitchen. So this caption initially suggested to us that the servants' house was built on the site of an old kitchen. Some of the historic documents in our archives talk about a kitchen that was located northwest of the Henry house, and that burned down in 1928. So for a time, this led us to believe we were investigating two different buildings on one site, with the servants' house built sometime after the kitchen burned. However, more current research has overturned that theory. This architectural plan from the early 20th century shows the old kitchen at the corner of this shrub boundary right here. And its northern wall is in line with these gate posts right here. In this photo of the kitchen from 1912, we can see that shrub boundary right behind the house here. And our Cody, our Director of Historic Preservation, noticed recently that this boundary runs right between these two cedar trees. And what's more, that these two cedar trees are still growing on the property today. So this lets us roughly locate the old kitchen to a spot farther north of the servants' house site, which makes it a completely separate site and a potential site for future archaeology, which is really exciting. So if we continue to follow the chronology of the servants' house, we know that it was standing at least as early as 1936, and it pops up a few more times in Red Hill's archives before its demolition in 1963. So in this 1941 appraisal of Red Hill, one of the dwellings listed as settlement number 6, right down there, This dwelling seems to fit the description of the servant's house. It is the only single-story, three-room dwelling on this list, so it's possible that this was the home of Woodrow Baker, at least in the year 1941. I know on this record, it lists his name as Woodson, but in his census records, he is listed as Woodrow, so that's how I'll refer to him. The Bakers were a young Black family who lived at Red Hill in the early 40s. Woodrow was 22 in 1940, and he worked as a laborer who cut pulpwood. And his wife, Essie, was 23 that year and worked as a cook, possibly cooking for Lucy Harrison. They had 4 young children, and they are listed in the 1940 census right above Lucy's entry, which makes it likely that they lived near her house on the main grounds. And the only other domestic building we know of in that location at that time was the servant's house. So we know the names of at least one family who probably lived in the house, but there were likely also other residents throughout the years. The next images we have of the servant's house are from 1950. So this was after Lucy Harrison had died and the Patrick Henry Memorial Foundation had purchased the property. So here we can see the house a little more clearly, first from the north with the ice house just behind it, and that little garden shed right in front. And here's a closer image from the back of the house with the ice house just right next to it. In the 1950s, of course, the foundation was making plans to restore Red Hill to its 18th century appearance, and there was a bit of an issue about what to do with the servant's house. By the 1950s, no one was living in it, and the foundation considered renovating it into a house for Red Hill's caretaker, Mabel Bellwood. But by the 1960s, the house was in pretty poor condition. The foundation's president, James Easley, wrote in a letter, quote, "It is difficult for me to see how we could do anything of value with what is left of that relic. It has no historical significance, and only a few of the boards on the front of it are in any way sound so far as I could tell," unquote. So in 1963, the servant's house was demolished. The foundation at the time was really focused on representing Red Hill's 18th century history, so the servant's house may not have had a historical significance to the foundation at that point, but it certainly does have significance today as we try to interpret broader aspects of Red Hill's history. So fast forward to 2023, we made our plans to investigate this site and started by going through all Red Hill's archival maps to help us situate our excavations. The 1936 National Park Service survey over here was a major resource for us, and so were the landscape plans from the restoration in the 1950s and 60s. Our next step was to digitize these documents and put them into a Geographic Information System, or GIS. So creating a GIS for Red Hill was another one of our archaeology program's objectives that is still being worked on and has proved very useful for our archaeological investigations. And if you haven't heard of it before, GIS is a computer system that can do a whole lot of things. But for our purposes, it stores our maps, our aerial photos, and our archaeological data all in one place and connects them to geographic locations. So with our archival maps connected to these locations, we can then go out into the field with a GPS and see exactly where these old structures and features used to be. So once we had located the boundaries of the servant's house site using GIS and GPS, we opened up 3 test units close to the southeastern corner of the site. Our test units were 5 by 5 foot square sections, which we dug in 2-inch levels, which means that every 2 inches we stopped to record the depth, the soil colors, textures, and artifact types that we were seeing. We had over 40 wonderful volunteers. There we go. There's our volunteers. And they came to the site over the course of the summer to help with the field work. I can't thank them enough for all their work. As you can see, they were engaged in many parts of our field work, including digging, sifting the dirt, measuring depths and soil colors, helping with site forms. So a huge thank you to all of our archaeology volunteers. Our first unit proved to be the most interesting one, and sometimes perhaps the most frustrating as well. In the other two units, right here, we reached undisturbed subsoil about 6 to 8 inches down, but Unit 1 was kind of a whole other story. Usually you're looking at the stratigraphy of a site to tell you about its chronology. This is not from Red Hill, this is just an example. But when you have different types of soil layered one on top of another, like you see here, you can use that as a way of understanding what was going on at different periods of the site's occupation. So the top layers are the youngest, and then as you dig down, you get into progressively older layers that can help you understand how the site changed through time. However, across the majority of Unit 1, we ran into mottled soils, which indicates that at one time the area was dug up and backfilled, and all the stratigraphic layers of soil got mixed together. So you can see here all the different colors of the soil in the bottom of this unit. And the artifacts from this unit reflect that sort of mixing of layers as well. There were pieces of plastic that we were finding in the lower levels, for example, and there were some Native American stone tool artifacts that should have been much older, which were discovered early on in the upper layers. So as you can see in this photo, we did encounter an undisturbed subsoil in one corner of the unit. This is the southeastern corner, but the mottled fill stretched across the rest of the unit. So whatever was dug in this area was relatively wide and very deep, as it turned out. Once we had dug as far as we could safely go, which was about 3 feet, we were still encountering mixed artifacts and that mottled soil. So we put a test pit in the center of the unit to see if we could get to the bottom of it. And we did. We got to subsoil at a depth of almost 6 feet. So at some point, a pit was dug around the southeast corner of this building's outline, and it was at least 5 feet across and 6 feet deep. And then it was filled back in. So it's possible this was related to the demolition of the servants' house or the ice house, but we haven't found many documented details of the building's demolition to confirm this. So by this time, we had come across some letters that indicated the stone foundations of the house had been removed and reused during the 1963 demolition. So we knew we were not going to find those foundations, and really none of our test units were yielding anything that was terribly significant. So we decided to close our investigation of the servants' house site and switch gears. So for the rest of the field season, we conducted a shovel test pit survey across the western part of the lawn. So for this, we were digging small pits on a 25-foot grid to give us an idea of how the soil layers and artifact concentrations vary across this area. These X's on the map represent the pits that we dug. In total, there were about 83. And of course, we skipped the ones that fell inside the carriage house and along the boxwoods. In many of the pits, there was just one layer of one soil layer above subsoil, but in a few areas, there were two layers. And artifacts seemed to be concentrated around the expected areas where we knew buildings to be. So around the site of the William Wirt Henry Law Office, next to the Boxwood Maze, around the ice house, which was located here, and around the servants' house. So while there was nothing particularly groundbreaking about our investigation of the servants' house site, we did learn a few things by looking into this site. Our background research revealed the names of a family who likely lived in the house at one time, and we know about some of the work that they did at Red Hill. We found a few interesting artifacts, which I will show you shortly. And we now know about a large feature on the southeastern corner of the site. So in the bigger picture, this was what kicked off the Red Hill Archaeology program and helped us to engage volunteers and visitors in Red Hill's story and in general in archaeological research. Once again, a huge thank you to everyone who has come to help us dig or who has worked with us in the lab. And speaking of the lab, let's get into some of the artifacts we found last summer and what we do with them once they've been dug up. The main types of artifacts we found, both at the servants' house site and in the STPs, were bricks, brick fragments, mortar, nails, glass, and ceramic. Artifact analysis in these units was somewhat limited because they were all mixed together in those mottled soil layers. So in most cases, we couldn't connect them to a specific context in relation to one another or in relation to that location's history. As I said before, there were more modern artifacts in these units mixed in with 19th century and pre-18th century artifacts. And the majority of the artifact types here were architecture related and domestic related, which fits with what we know about the function of the servant's house. So there are a few artifacts that I think are worth highlighting that give us a little more insight into Red Hill's history. To me, some of the most interesting ones are those that have manufacturer's marks, because you can really go down a little research rabbit hole with those. So this brick was discovered in Unit 1 by some of our volunteers, and as you can see, by some of our young volunteers, which is really awesome. It took a little cleaning to see it clearly, but it does indeed have initials stamped into this rectangular cutout, which is called a frog. If you look closely, you can see a capital S, an ampersand right here in the middle, and an F. So we did a little searching and eventually found Sayer and Fisher Brick Company, which was based out of Sayreville, New Jersey. And at one time, it was one of the largest brick manufacturers in the world. They operated from 1850 to 1970, and by the early 20th century, they were shipping bricks to other states via train and boat. And actually, Sayer and Fisher bricks were used in the base of the Statue of Liberty, as well as in the Empire State Building, which is kind of cool. So because Sayer and Fisher was in operation for so long, it's difficult to date this brick, but we have a few clues. There have been a few other S&F bricks discovered around Red Hill, one around the eastern porch of the Henry House, another around the above-ground foundations of two cabins on the Quarter Place Trail, and another one during an excavation of the greenhouse site in 2001. So these last two sites, the Quarter Place cabins and the greenhouse, date to the 19th century, so it's possible that this brick also dates to that period. Whether this brick was a part of the servant's house or if it was refuse from another demolished feature, we don't really know, but it does give us a clue about some of the little details of Red Hill's architectural history. This next artifact was also from Test Unit 1, and it was our consulting archaeologist, Craig, who identified this one. I tried to take the photo so that you could see this sharpened edge along the front of this artifact, but this is a quartzite scraper. I mentioned it a little before, but we do find Native American lithics or stone tools all around Red Hill's property. Indigenous people, likely related to the Saponi and Occaneechi tribes, lived on this land for thousands of years before it was turned into a plantation. And most of their material culture in this area dates to the late woodland period, about 980 to 1650. So quartz was one of the primary materials for stone tools in this area, but we do find other materials used, such as the quartzite for this scraper. And you can hopefully see this stone was worked all along this side in the front to create a sharp edge, and the opposite side is unsharpened. Scrapers had a variety of uses, including processing animal hides, processing plants, butchering, and a lot more. There were a few other stone tools and tool-making byproducts that we found last year, but this was one of the first that we found, so it kind of stood out to me. The next artifact I want to highlight is of a musical nature. Some of you musicians might recognize this. This is the brass reed plate of a harmonica. This actually came from one of the shovel test pits near the southern end of the servant's house. So this was one of the last things we found before the end of the summer. And it sticks out to me because it gives us a kind of a glimpse of, if you will, the musical history of Red Hill. We know Patrick Henry played the fiddle. His wife Dorothea had an English guitar. There were probably musicians among the other Henrys who lived here, among the enslaved community and the sharecroppers. And now we have evidence of one more instrument that someone played here at one time. So as I said, this is a reed plate, which is one of two that are screwed into the comb of a harmonica. There's a little diagram there. And reed plates can be replaced over time. So the last artifact I want to highlight is this ceramic sherd, or really it's 3 sherds that fit together. We found many ceramics in our excavations, mostly undecorated sherds, but we encountered a good number that did have some form of decoration. So this is a piece of pearlware, which is a type of refined earthenware that is usually an off-white color due to the addition of cobalt to the glaze. Pearlware like this are usually decorated, and on this sherd we do have some hand-painted polychrome lines, waves, and dots. In the late 18th century, early pearlware was typically decorated with blue chinoiserie style patterns, but around 1795 there was a shortage in the cobalt supply caused by the Napoleonic Wars, and the blue painted wares started to decline during that time. So between 1795 and 1815, polychrome ceramics show more minimized use of blue in their decorations and more emphasis on yellows, greens, and dark browns, like what we see here. And a little while ago, just by chance, I came across a matching sherd from the 2001 greenhouse excavation. So perhaps these were part of a set at one point, or perhaps they even belonged to the same vessel. So once artifacts have been excavated from a site, they need to go somewhere to be cleaned and cataloged. So as our archaeology program was getting started, we needed space for a lab. And fortunately, there was a perfect space just up the road. So in 2018, the foster home organization that used to be on Red Hill Road moved out, and their old administrative building came back to Red Hill. We now use the building as offices for some of our staff, and in the basement, we set up our archaeology lab. The basement used to be the kitchen and cafeteria for the boys' home, and it has adapted really well for our purposes. So now I'd like to take you on a quick virtual tour of the lab and walk you through what we do with the artifacts once we bring them here. So we'll start at the back entrance where most of our volunteers come through when they're here to help with lab work. When you walk through the doors, you'll notice some evidence of the archaeology field trip station that we've developed for the schools that come to visit. And continuing forward into the lab, we've got our tables all set up for artifact cleaning and labeling. So let's go take a look at the artifacts that have come in from the field. So if you turn to your right, go up to that pass-through window, and there are our artifacts. When we dig up the artifacts, we put them in these bags that are carefully labeled with the site name, the test unit or STP number, and the layer and level that the artifact was from. As we process the artifacts, it is really important to keep this information connected with the artifacts so that we can analyze them later on. So going back to the tables in the center of the room, this is where we clean the artifacts using water and toothbrushes. When the artifacts have been cleaned, they are placed in a drying tray with their labeled bags, and they are taken to these drying racks so they can dry out. The next step is to catalog the artifacts in our database. So I take the tray of clean, dry artifacts back to my desk in the corner here, and I record the category of artifact, what it looks like, what it's made of, its specific descriptive features that will help us analyze the assemblage all together. So all artifacts then get their own individual numbers that identify the excavation site, the unit, the layer, and the level that they came from. So now it's time to label the artifacts and package them for storage. So our lab volunteers carefully write these labels on bags that individual artifacts will go into, and we put printed labels inside the bags as a backup. Some of the artifacts will also get labels attached to them, like this one here. And once these artifacts are bagged and organized, they will get put into Hollinger boxes and into storage. We keep inventories of all of our archaeological collections, so it's easy to look up what we have for any research or exhibit planning purposes. And that is how we process the artifacts. So we're getting towards the end here, but I will leave you with a quick summary of this year's investigation before we get into questions. We are focusing on the original site of Patrick Henry's law office. The office was located twice in the past 2.5 centuries, and where it sits today is roughly 75 feet south of where it was in Patrick Henry's time. So in case the foundation ever makes plans to move it back onto its original site, we first want to do some archaeology to explore the area and find out if the original foundations are still intact. So we started out with a ground-penetrating radar survey over that area, which was done by Chartrand Geoarchaeological Solutions back in May. And while the survey didn't pick up any foundations, it did locate a square-shaped anomaly that could possibly be chimney remains. So we're planning to dig into that likely in the next couple of weeks. Right now, we're in the midst of a shovel test pit survey. We're digging 30 pits on a 10-foot grid. And what we're seeing so far are usually 2 to 3 layers of soil with some artifacts on the eastern side, but really not many at all on the western side where that square anomaly is. We are still in the beginning stages of this investigation, so do stay tuned to see what we find. And thank you all for so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed learning about the archaeology we're doing here at Red Hill. And if anyone you know might be interested in volunteering, there is more info about that on our website at redhill.org/archaeology. So thanks so much for tuning in. And now I think we have time for questions.
All right, thanks so much, Lucia. Really wonderful work you've been doing. And you're right, we do have questions now. One you've touched on a little bit. This one comes from Cindy Smith. Pretty simple. How can I volunteer?
Really good question. Thanks, Cindy. So yes, so there's more information on our website. You kind of have to navigate a little, go up to the preservation tab at the top, and under that is archaeology. Basically, what we need this summer for fieldwork is just for you to review and sign an acknowledgement, kind of a participation agreement, just acknowledging, yes, I'll be doing basic outdoor work and all the risks that come with that. So send that in to me. You can email that to me at lucia@redhill.org, and just let me know what days you plan to come. We have volunteer opportunities open Tuesdays through Fridays this summer from 10 to 4. And you are welcome to volunteer any amount of time you'd like. If you want to come for one day, you can. If you want to come on a weekly basis, it's really open to whatever your schedule is. And you can spend any amount of time on the day you volunteer. So just let me know at least a day in advance of when you plan to come, and I will send you the information about how to get to the site, what you'll need to do to prepare, and all of that good stuff.
All right, great. We got another question here from Audrey. She asks, which artifact was most exciting to find, and was anything you found unexpected or surprising?
Good question. So most exciting. So we found a lot of brick, but that one brick with the S&F manufacturer's mark was kind of an exciting day, partly because it was volunteers who came across that, and we were finding a lot of really cool stuff that day. So finding that brick and like asking questions about like, where did it come from? Where is this brick manufacturing company? Was just kind of fun to trace down. So I would say the brick, anytime, I really like coming across ceramics. So anytime we came across ceramics was really fun. Anything you found unexpected or surprising, definitely that 6 feet of modeled soil going all the way down was unexpected and surprising because we didn't have any evidence that that kind of feature had been dug in the past. So I think, yeah, that was what was most surprising for us.
Well, I think in your presentation, you described it really well when you said that, back in the 1950s and 60s, what they considered historic was very different from what we consider historic today. And this, I think, is one of the best examples of that. They thought,
Definitely.
yeah, it's not that old. We'll just dig it up and no one will ever care about it.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Exactly. Now we're asking questions about it that they might have been able to answer.
There you go. Absolutely. All right. And this next question comes from Audrey as well. She asked, what determines how deep you dig?
That is a good question. It's a question we get a lot. So we dig until we stop finding things, which is when we hit undisturbed subsoil, which is a layer that will not have any artifacts in it. And usually we determine that subsoil by the lack of artifacts and also the typical color and texture that we get into. So usually around Red Hill, that subsoil is like solid red clay. So that's where we stop digging. We also want to pay attention in our units to digging to safe depths. We don't want to go so deep that there's a danger of the walls collapsing in the unit. So that's kind of why we put that test unit right in the center so that we could continue excavating, but nobody had to be down 6 feet deep into the ground.
All right, fantastic. And it looks like we got one more question here from Cindy. What is the greatest challenge in your research?
Oh, that is a good question. Really just starting an archaeology program kind of from scratch. And it's certainly not just me. I have so much support from our consulting archaeologist, Dr. Bates, and Craig Rose, and also from the Red Hill staff as well. A lot of support from our groundskeepers who have to put up with me digging into their lawn. So I'd say this is a very broad answer, but just starting something from scratch, I think, and figuring out what we need, what kinds of equipment we need, what kinds of levels of volunteer participation we need, has been challenging at times, but really fun because as a team, we're kind of able to shape this how we want it and get to investigate the questions that we have about Red Hill.
All right. Well, I've actually got one question for you, Lucia, and this one is looking forward in time. Where do you see your department, the archaeology program? Where do you see that in 5 years? Do you see this as a growing program with tons of volunteers and staff? Do you see it working in tandem with contractors in the future to maybe aid in the further restoration of Red Hill and reconstruction of lost buildings? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So we're hoping that this program is ongoing, that it continues to grow, attract volunteers. Maybe at some point in the future, we can offer field schools. So we're hoping that it's something that can keep going. There's definitely lots of questions that remain about Red Hills landscape that we can answer with archaeological investigations. We already have a plan for next year to dig at the quarter place cabins, the 2 cabin foundations that are there. So I do see this program continuing to grow, and hopefully, more people will be able to get involved in that as well.
All right. It looks like while you were answering that question, we got another question come in on Facebook. This one is from Takesha. How challenging is it for you to use the Munsell color system? That's
a good question. Thank you, Keisha. And Keisha, you got some experience with the Munsell color system when you volunteered. So the Munsell color system, I don't have the book here with me right now, but it is a tool that archaeologists and soil scientists and probably a lot of other scientists use to be able to identify soil colors. So it's like a small book with pages of paint chips that you can compare your soil colors to, and you get like a number identifier so that we can kind of standardize how we talk about soil colors. Doing that is sometimes challenging. You kind of want to have some shade when you're comparing the soil colors. So on a really sunny day, when we don't have our tent out like we're doing right now with our STPs, the sun kind of throws off my eyes. So that can be challenging to do. And then of course, everybody sees colors differently. So if you have multiple people looking at one cell and trying to compare soil colors, you might have multiple different interpretations of what that color matches up to. But in the end, it's really just to standardize how we describe the colors of the soil. So sometimes it's challenging, but not terrible.
All right, great. Well, it looks like that was our last question, and I think we'll wrap it up. So, Lucia, again, thank you for presenting today as part of our Red Hill Rediscovered lecture series. Again, thank you to everyone in the audience who participated with their questions and listened in. And as Lucia said, we're always looking for volunteers, always looking for help. So if you want to help us out, you can find more at redhill.org/archaeology. So I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Cody. Bye, everyone.